Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about authority. Obviously, if you play BG3, this has a completely different connotation. However, the way that we're going to be playing with the word authority is going to be another focal point. So just like how we used the tailbone, how we used the belt knot, I want now to focus on the solar plexus as a way to focus on aspects of your swordsmanship, right? So the term I'm going to be using is authority. So that's going to have a few different branches to it. The first one I really want to play with is how you breathe, right? So you might be thinking like, okay, breath work is going to be like kind of like the higher kind of chest area, but I really want you to focus like right here, right? Again, if you know where your solar plexus is, right? So it's again, obviously above the navel, kind of like slightly below like the pectoral, so it's kind of like right here. If you ever had the wind knocked out of you, this is like a nice prime area for that, right? So when we talk about authority, so like the way I'm going to be using it in this setting is going to be how you control. So the first layer to that is learning how to control oneself, right? So for example, if we are engaged in a fight, right, and we're both in our happy little fighting stance, if I'm just kind of like breathing willy-nilly, like right, and just kind of like looking all over the place, very, very obviously, I have very little control over what I'm doing, how I'm moving. Versus, if I really focus on how I'm breathing, again, right here, as opposed to necessarily higher up. So, I talked about breath work in another video as well. The main thing I want you to focus on for now is instead of thinking about shrugging breath, like, I want you to think about almost like you're going to be expanding this way. So, that way, right? It's going to give you a lot more control over your core action, right? Literally your core action. So all I want you to do is for now, if you're in guard, if you just did like a giant cut or something like that, for now, focus on your breathing and focus again on like kind of pushing your solar plexus out as you breathe in and as you exhale, again, kind of compressing that. However, I assume you know how to breathe, right? So let's talk about how we're going to actually use that breath work to have stronger swordsmanship. One way is going to be simply breathing in as you prepare for a cut, breathing out as you execute a cut. So this is how we usually teach it to newbies, right? So if we're here, I want to breathe in as I prepare. I'm going to exhale as I cut. That's going to be true for really any two-step movement. And again, when you're starting off, that's what most of your movements are going to be, right? So if I'm here, I'm going to be eventually going into a stance to cut. I can breathe in as I prepare, and as I breathe out, I can cut in like so. So that is one way you can start to control it. Another way is, and this is going to be more kendo-ka kind of oriented, right? But it's also going to be really good for in terms of fighting. It's just learning how to moderate how you're breathing. So what I mean by that is, if we are actually engaged in a fight and I'm just breathing freely, it's going to give my opponent a rhythm against which they can kind of like, break that rhythm to attack me when I'm, inhaling, for example. However, if we have like a full lung capacity and I'm kind of like getting into your range, ideally I have complete control of the breath. I'm only really exhaling as I'm moving and cutting and stuff like that, as opposed to breathing in with every movement or anything like that. So that's a higher level way of thinking. So as you're fighting, so imagine if we're kind of in line with the E with Kickside, if I'm out of range right now, I can breathe, right? However, the moment I really start to crest here, I'm assuming the camera is going to be lining up with that. That's when I want to be really conservative with inhales. A good way to control the way you're inhaling and exhaling is solar plexus, right? So keeping your core nice and tight, focusing on the solar plexus. As I'm moving in, I can just kind of constantly exhale, 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 kind of motion. So hopefully that's making sense. Just to piggyback off that, so something similar that we've talked about in the past, I won't do like a whole segment here, is the idea of synchrony. Again, if you're thinking about your breathing, so if I use the it's not really an acronym, but a phrase called Ki Ken Tai Ichi, again something that I learned from Isabella Church Sensei in Kendo. So Ki meaning breathing, what we're doing here, Ken as in Kendo, sword, Tai like Taekwondo, which is Korean, but you get the idea, body, right? Ichi meaning one. So all those three things in one motion. So one way you can really work on your synchrony is also focusing on the solar plexus and how that's engaging with your breath work. However, you also want authority not over yourself, but also over your opponent, right? So we already introduced the idea of like, if I'm breathing very freely and I'm fighting, it may not work in my benefit, right? So if I'm constantly inhaling, which is generally a time when I'm a little bit on the weaker side, they could come in, give a nice stab or something like that. However, there's another aspect of breathing that is very, very common especially like in modern martial arts, and that is either the ki or the ki up, right? Depending on if you're coming from a Japanese or Korean background, or just the yell, right? So if you ever watched any martial arts media or anything like that, or even especially a tournament, you've probably heard people just yelling and shouting all of the time. However, there is obviously a way that I would encourage you to ki or ki up or yell, and that's not going to be with your vocal cords, right? So, oops, sorry about that. So not with your vocal cords. Obviously, will it still go through your vocal cords? Yes, right? I think I keep hitting mic. However, the main emphasis is I want you to use your solar plexus, again, to kind of push that shout towards the person. So the analogy that I usually give, if you've ever played Skyrim, for example, this will make some sense as well. Think about your ki up not so much as a shout, because that will kind of ruin your vocal cords, especially if you're either teaching for a long time, or if you're at a tournament and you need to like converse afterwards, which would be bad, right? If you have no vocal cords to do so. So really think about punching someone with your voice, right? So I don't know how the mic's going to really work with this, but we're going to try it, right? So there's several different ways you can ki up, right? There's some that are very, very dramatic and really good for like if you're at a tournament, for example, you want a lot of attention to you, you just want to be very, very dramatic. That will be a lot more of like the vocal aspect as well. I'll give you an idea of that. Because this is a sword channel, I should probably actually do some stuff with sword. So if I did do like a cut, for example, a very, very common type of ki up you're going to be hearing in a tournament would be just "Aya!" and just kind of like strangled sort of voice, right? Cool. I already regret it. I really have like a slightly gravelly aspect now to my voice. However, and again, transparency where transparency is due, this is an idea that I took. Picked up a little bit more from my kendo background, but it's almost like it's going to be quasi-operatic, right? So instead of like really strangled, like up here, a little bit lower. So, right? So a little bit deeper down here, right? So I'm sorry for those of you who are using my phone. But yeah, so as you're trying to dominate, right, your opponent, again, exert your authority over your opponent, that is one way you can kind of do so, right? So very, very common in a fight where you're going to be seeing is we're both here before we really start to engage, we're like, "Yeah!" and kind of getting ready. And when you eventually strike, you can be like, "Yeah!" kind of thing, right? So you're going to hear a lot of ki-upping and a lot of fighting, at least in the more modern perspective. If you ever fight me, I don't like ki-upping, so I'm kind of, do what I preach, not what I say sort of thing. But this is an excellent way for you to kind of convey your threatening aura on someone. And a third aspect that I'd like for us to play with is I can make a story to really make it kind of still fit in with the authority, but it is still an aspect of the solar plexus specifically. So if you ever watch my instructor, so Master Kim, when he does specifically center cuts, right? He's not just simply doing, just this, right? He's not cutting that way. He's really using his solar plexus, right? So kind of like the grand theme of what we're doing here, right? So like when he cuts, it's almost like his solar plexus kind of like is pushing out this way. So almost like coming from, flat to convex, concave sometimes. like when he cuts, it's really more like up here, kind of pushing up with your solar plexus and cutting. So kind of opening up and then collapsing as you cut. That will give you a lot more, again, stability and power with your cut. It will also help dissipate some of the impact of a strike. So when I'm really cutting in here, if I was just using only my arms to swing forward, that was a bad cut. But if I was to cut forward, once it makes impact, it's going to really hit, again, the first weak joint. I can still have like a good power with it. However, the more you use your solar plexus, especially with a cut, because this is sort of like the last frontier of what I usually call the core, right? Because then we start talking about like the pectorals and the shoulders and stuff like that. So when you cut, I want you to think about that solar plexus kind of coming up a little bit, kind of like pushing itself forward as I prepare and cut. That's going to be the same also for our diagonal. So again, press up, forward, and really collapse as you cut here. And that's going to give you a lot more feedback, stability, and power. I'm endeavoring to keep these videos short, right? So obviously there are many more ideas we can kind of play with here, but for now, I want you to think about that solar plexus, how you can exert a little more control over yourself, again, a little more authority over your own agency, how you can kind of pressure your opponent, especially in a fight, and ultimately also use it to just be aware of how to get a stronger, more durable cut. But with that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training.